Feminine Genius Ministries teaches the Marquette method of natural family planning, which uses objective biomarkers to understand fertility and reproductive health. The protocols can be tailored to women at all stages of fertility, including postpartum. Your cycle is an important indicator of health and should be treated as such. So every instructor at Feminine Genius Ministries is a registered nurse and certified Marquette model instructor. With a variety of effective biomarkers to utilize, an instructor can work with you to personalize your approach to cycle tracking. Group sessions, private sessions, and a self-paced online course are available to provide multiple options to meet your individual scheduling needs and learning style. Also, Feminine Genius Ministries is giving our listeners a coupon code throughout the month of May for 10% off all classes. The code is Hormone Genius. To work with one of the Feminine Genius Ministries instructors, check out their website, feminingeniusministries.com. I do want women to know that there is an alternative to suppressing their bodies with hormones, that they can see their body as a good and they can live in that body holistically.
Totally. Oh my gosh. It's amazing.
Join co-hosts Jamie Rocci and Teresa Kenny as they educate women about the beauty of the feminine design and empower women to take charge of their health.
They're going to be so amazing. You're going to be so empowered by understanding your feminine genius and your hormone genius. I don't think I could live my whole life knowing this and not sharing it with anyone.
Hello and welcome to the Hormone Genius podcast. Here with my co-host Jamie as always, and we are doing an interview today that we are very pumped about. We have Alexandria DeVito with us, and she is going to tell us all things related to preconception health. And this is, you could say the tagline is 9 months is not enough, which is so cool because I think a lot of us just haven't thought about this before, but when you actually say that out loud, you're like, well, of course, 9 months is not enough. So this is going to be such a fun episode. And Alexandria is a functional nutritionist specializing in fertility and preconception health. She is the author of 9 months is not enough, the ultimate pre-pregnancy checklist to create a baby-ready body and build generational health. She is also the founder and CEO of Poplin, the first pre-pregnancy wellness company. And prior to founding Poplin, Alexandria worked in management, consulting, and she has an MBA from Harvard, which, I mean, that's amazing in and of itself, and has a master's degree in nutrition, extensive training as a doula, yoga teacher, and personal trainer, and is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. And this all, of course, has informed her about the topic we are going to dive into today, which is pre-pregnancy wellness. So thank you so much, Alexandria, for being here today with us.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you both for hosting me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
So let's just dive in. Why is 9 months not enough?
So when we think about women's health, usually we talk about it in the context of one of two things. Either contraception or pregnancy. And we forget about this intervening period between, which is the preconception period. So preconception basically means before or between pregnancy. So whether this is a first pregnancy or a fifth pregnancy, whether you're 23 or you're 43, preconception is relevant to you. And the reason that preconception is so important and the reason that I want to, scream it from the rooftops is that proper preconception care has two big benefits that I don't think are talked about enough. The first is that it increases the likelihood of getting pregnant. And then number two is it improves the probability of having a healthy pregnancy and healthy baby, right? And those two things are often related, but we don't talk about it as such. And so we kind of, treat getting pregnant as we haven't been treating it as its own period of time. And I think it deserves attention. And there have actually been preconception guidelines in the literature for over 40 years. but no one's really talking about them. And they're not being filtered into clinical practice. In fact, less than 20% of females are even being offered a preconception visit, and probably even fewer know to even ask for it. And I know you all are big, advocates of informed consent and, big advocates of getting the information out to know just what your options are. And so I want people to know that preconception is an option on the menu. It is available to you. And if it is something that you so choose, that there is so much more that you can do to prepare to get pregnant, then kind of cross your fingers and hope it will happen.
This is such an important topic. Like you're saying, it is something that is overlooked, I think. And I think it's because the focus is on, I want to achieve a pregnancy. I want to achieve a pregnancy. And we forget that there can be a plan to achieve a pregnancy in terms of our health. But I think for some women who really struggle with being a little like maybe really super type A, let's say, and the high controlling personalities, and we all know it. And I can say I somewhat fall into this category, that sometimes this preconception, this pre-pregnancy, phase might drive us a little crazy. So how do we begin doing this in a mentally stable and healthy way? How would you say that we should begin entering into this thought?
What a nuanced question. I mean, I would say as someone who did 2 master's degrees at the same time, I certainly relate to the type A personality, right? And that is originally what struck me about this space. And when I started working as a nutritionist and had a lot of clients that were struggling with fertility, I realized they were coming to me late into their fertility journey. So they had been struggling to conceive for a year or 2 years or 3 years. And they had been kind of ping-ponged around between providers. Still, we're not getting answers. Still, we're not getting pregnant. And we're just emotionally, physically, mentally spent. And I was so struck by this. It was just really difficult to watch. And I was also experiencing this with friends who were going through the same journey and, were kind of tugging at me to say, hey, do you have any advice and guidance? And I was like, wait, how do we not have the same preparation rituals and planning for getting pregnant like we do for every other major milestone, like a wedding, for example, right? Many people plan that a year in advance, and there's checklist upon checklist, resource upon resource of how to do it and how to optimize it, right? Buying a house today has more infrastructure and support than getting pregnant does. And so this is a behavior that we follow in other areas of life, but for some reason, we have not been given the opportunity to do it in this realm. And so I think, the way that I like to talk about it is, yes, let's control what we can control and let go of the rest, right? And that's, I think, parenting 101 as well, right? So, I think giving people the main things, and what I talk about in the book is a lot of like, what are the macro factors that we know can interfere with fertility? Like, what are the fertility blockers in and around your environment? Let's manage those. And then on the micro environment, I talk a lot about testing because that's the company that I founded. That's what we do. What is your micro environment? Because today we treat all 30-year-olds as equal, all 25-year-olds as equal, all 40-year-olds as equal. And that's not cellularly true. And it's, a very inefficient approach. So the way I like to think about it is let's try to manage the macro factors, be conscious of the micro factors, and then, getting pregnant is also there's the kind of like the spiritual side of it and the feminine side of it, which is it's one of the most surrendered and receptive things that, we can ever do. And so it is this balancing of manage and release.
Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful. I don't think I've kind of heard it described that way. I was looking in your book, and I'm just, because I am a medical professional, I'm so grateful for the information, and I'm thinking about other medical professionals out there. And I'm thinking about something that I think you had said on another podcast you were on, I listened to, that it's not the doctor's fault in a sense that they don't really offer this because they don't really get trained for it. And so if you were to go in and you were to say to your doctor, hey, I would love a preconception visit, and can you test me for all these things? Your doctor would look at you and probably be like, I am uncomfortable right now. So I'll have one of 2 reactions. I'll shut you down because I'm uncomfortable, or I just won't do what you are, asking me to. So for the medical professionals out there too, I think this is really informative, but where do we start? And I know the macro stuff, we've spent a lot of time in this podcast on health and lifestyle. So certainly our listeners are aware of that. But I think what people really want the nitty gritty details of, like, what is like the biomarkers or the testing or things that people should be getting preconception to and what should be they thinking about in that reality?
Mm-hmm. So many pieces in what you just said. I mean, I think, yes, like as we think about preconception, there are barriers on the patient side and barriers on the provider side. And so that's when I actually think, I mean, that was the impetus for starting a business, is when you have kind of consumer awareness issues and then you have, you supply side and demand side challenges, right? Then I start to think about, okay, well, what is the commercial solution here to try to fill some of those gaps? And right, doctors are not even being given 15 minutes to spend with someone, and a proper preconception visit probably takes at least an hour, if not longer. So you just don't even have the container within which to do this. And that's actually one of the reasons we just launched something at Poplin earlier this week to try to help with that process of kind of how do you prepare so that when you go into your doctor's visit, you can make the most of it, to help both the providers and the consumers. That being said, I think, what I would say on the testing side, because, certainly this is near and dear to me, is that I think today, and I was alluding to this earlier, we treat all individuals based on age-based metrics. And that's just particularly true in fertility. And we're using standard data tables to say, okay, well, you are 30, therefore we're going to follow the protocol for every 30-year-old. And you are 35, so we're going to follow the protocol for every 35-year-old. But that is incomplete at best and completely inaccurate at worst, because there is a huge difference for many people between their chronological age, their age in years that we can look at their birth certificate and all agree on, versus the age of their cells, like their cellular vitality. And cellular vitality is a function of chronological age, but not only that, it's how do you live your life, the types of foods that you're eating, how heavy or light you live your life, how much stress you have, the environment you're in, the amount of nurturing relationships, all of these things modulate our cells. And so I actually was, joking, but not really joking with my team, like if we covered up the age on the test, can you guess the age of this individual, right? And the answer is probably not. And that should tell us something, right? Because I've looked at plenty of 25-year-old tests that look, right, and I'm air quoting look, right, much older, and plenty of 40-year-old tests that look vastly younger. And so I think that it is really helpful to get a snapshot of your own cellular health. And the way that I think about it is, fertility is an extension of your overall health. And I know that, this is something that you all have discussed, right? It is not just a below the waist conversation. It is not just about hormones. It is about hormones, but not only about hormones. So the way that, we talk about it is we're looking at 5 different categories of health. I talk about this in the book. And then also at Poplin, we have your blood status, we have your hormone status, we have your immune status, your metabolic status, and your nutrient status. And all of these things are the things when I kind of dove into the literature early on and people were asking me, why is this happening? And I was like, please hold, I will get back to you. I need to do some research. I kind of went in and just looked at all of the data, and the data is there. There's plenty of data that talks about all of the reasons why someone would struggle to conceive. And it's, issues with your thyroid function, it's nutrient deficiencies, it's autoimmune conditions, right? It's metabolic dysfunction, right? And that could manifest as polycystic ovary syndrome, or it could manifest as prediabetes or diabetes, right? And if we know all of the potential things, or at least the large percentage of the things that can interfere, we can screen for those in advance, and we can give yourself the gift of time to one by one start to address them if you would like to.
So good. I mean, it really is such an important, those 5 things that you just said. It doesn't seem to me so overwhelming, maybe for the type A personality, so kind of going back to that control factor, it's that idea of just knowing, having a snapshot of understanding what is my vitality like, what are the chances of achieving a pregnancy perhaps, and then what do I need to do to address it. But in your book, I'm sure you also talk about like the different labs and things that you can do to measure that pre-pregnancy wellness. So let's dig into a little bit more about like how we can measure those things. And then we can move on to like, how do we optimize pre-pregnancy wellness?
Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about some of the things, the more common things that I'll see within each of the categories?
Would love that.
Example. Okay.
Awesome.
So I'll start with blood status. So we're looking there at a CBC, a complete blood count. And this is, and one of the things that I'm consistently surprised by is that we see a lot of iron deficiency on testing. And in addition to looking at a CBC, we're also looking at ferritin, which is your iron storage protein. And so basically, you can sometimes have a normal CBC. In fact, we see it a lot, a normal CBC and a very low ferritin. And if you're not looking at ferritin as well, you may miss that. And this could be responsible in your daily life for fatigue, lethargy. But, when we think about getting pregnant, it can be responsible for challenges getting pregnant and then also sustaining that pregnancy. And your blood volume increases significantly in the first trimester of pregnancy. So if you're kind of on the edge going into pregnancy, right, and then your blood volume increases a lot, right, you're more likely to trip into a nutrient deficient, in this case, iron deficient state. So I think the stats are that it's 15 to 25% of pregnancies have iron deficiency anemia, which to me is a staggering number for something that is easily figure outable, right? And usually easily addressable. Sometimes you can have some recalcitrant issues with iron repletion, but generally speaking, we can make a lot of strides in moving towards addressing it. So that's one I see incredibly commonly. Another one is we look at, hormone status, right? We look at sex hormones, we look at stress hormones, and we look at a lot of different things. So not just the hormones themselves, but also the binding globulins, right? So one thing that I talk to people about is like, even if you have a lot of hormones running around, like testosterone is a great example. You could have high testosterone, but you could also have high sex hormone binding globulin. I know this is something that you've talked about as well. And if you have high sex hormone binding globulin, it is binding to your hormone, testosterone in particular, which is why you may not actually feel the effects of that testosterone, and you may be blunting the impact on your libido, for example, on your motivation and your energy. So it's important to understand, because the way that we would manage that is different. If you have an abundance of hormone and an abundance of binding globulins, that's different than if you have low hormones, right? The way that you'd intervene. And so these nuances really matter. And then one more I'll give, because I'm shocked at the numbers that we're seeing, but a very high percentage of individuals that we're testing are showing early indicators of autoimmune conditions. And the clinical literature says this, that, it's been increasing year on year. Autoimmune conditions are disproportionately present in the female population. It's about 80% of diagnoses, and it takes on average 5 years and 5 different doctors to get an autoimmune diagnosis. So it's an incredibly long and sometimes harrowing road. It's very underdiagnosed. So we screen for it because it can be responsible for miscarriage, in particular recurrent miscarriage. And so we're seeing a lot of early indicators for that. And once you know that you may have an autoimmune process in place, then you can follow up with your doctor and talk about medication management if that is relevant. You can talk about maybe dietary interventions depending on lifestyle modifications. Right, a lot of these things can be resolved through diet, lifestyle, supplementation, sometimes medications and procedures. So that's just a few of the things that we see a lot.
The autoimmune stuff is so hard, Alexandria. And I think I feel, again, for the medical professional, because that's where I'm at. And, you can have these tests that point towards autoimmunity, but they're non-specific a lot of times. Mm-hmm. I can send somebody to a rheumatologist with a positive ANA, anti-nuclear antibody. Nothing will be found but a generic diagnosis of a mixed connective tissue disease, which means really nothing. Mm-hmm. And you're right. I mean, the last 100 years, we have an incredible increase in autoimmunity due to a lot of factors, even COVID, bringing on, like viruses, toxins probably are two of the biggest ones we could say definitely are affecting it. And unfortunately, it's not something we can all completely avoid, right? I mean, we're all exposed to these things. We all have to just live in this world. So, there are a lot we can do, and that'll be my next question. But I really love, what you said about cellular vitality. And it makes me think of, one of the first functional medicine people I followed and listened to was Daniel Pompa. And his tagline is heal the cell to get well. And this idea that you have to go way, way, way upstream, because if you are constantly focused on kind of like the stuff downstream, you're in a way, you're never going to get to the cellular healing that you need to get to. So you have to move so far upstream to heal the cell. But what are some of those things in terms of, the exposures that we have that we can modify? And what are your best tips for our patients' preconception in that way?
It's such an important question because I think one of the things that I was conscious of with testing is that everything on our tests can be modified, with the exception of your blood type, right? I think it's not helpful to anyone who's taking a test if the test that they're taking is not actionable. So you get this result back and then you're like, well, I don't know what to do with it, or I can't do anything about it, right? That is not particularly helpful. So I want to make sure that we are testing things that people can have agency over, right? So I think that's a really foundational principle of testing. I really do believe in, people having information about their own bodies, with this understanding that we want to give them information that they can do something about. So I think on the autoimmune specifically, and then I think it's, it related to some of the other things, but I think autoimmune is a unique thing. There's different theories about what's driving autoimmunity right out there. I think one of the more compelling ones that I've seen is by Dr. Fasano. He talks about kind of this autoimmune triad where there's a genetic predisposition, a leaky gut, or dysfunction in the gut, and then a trigger, right? And so what that means is essentially, lots of people could have a genetic predisposition, but if they don't have a trigger, for example, then they will not manifest overt autoimmune symptomatology, potentially. And the trigger could be different for everyone. For some people, it could be getting married. For some people, it could be getting divorced. For some people, it could be a car accident, right? For some people, and we see this a lot, it actually can be pregnancy, right? Pregnancy itself can be a major stress on the body. And so this is one of the reasons why I think it's actually helpful to have titers, to have understanding before pregnancy and after pregnancy, whether or not there are autoimmune processes in play. And then this last piece around, leaky gut, which I think, that term is kind of thrown around, but essentially what the thesis is that basically we have this, kind of one cell lining in our gut. And if we're eating certain foods, we're stressed out, right? It impairs that gut lining and it gets leaky, i.e. stuff starts to get through it. And what happens is food particles start to get outside of our stomach and they go into our bloodstream, and our body, rightfully so, says, oh, wait a minute. These food particles should not be in your bloodstream, and they start attacking it. And where the issue, comes is that those cells of food can sometimes mirror the structure of the cells of some of our organs. And so one that's commonly talked about is gluten and thyroid, right? So that the gluten protein looks cellularly like our thyroid cells. And so our body gets confused and it does what it thinks it's supposed to be doing, which is attack the enemy. But in this case, the enemy is your thyroid cells, right? So this is kind of how the theory goes. And so if you want to address that, it's how do you restore the lining of the gut, right? And so I see this a lot of times, like when I was, working in clinical practice, I would run a lot of food sensitivity tests. And sometimes we come back with clients who basically their food sensitivity has lit up like a Christmas tree, right? Like it was all over the place. Like there was things going. And, so then you had to ask the question, okay, well, are they actually reactive to every single one of these foods, or is there something else going on? And usually, cut to the chase here. Usually what happened is you have to, focus on resealing that gut function. And once you do that, then they're not reacting to all of these foods. You bring the body's immune system back into balance. And so you kind of want an immune system that's vigilant, like not over vigilant and not under vigilant, kind of right in between. And so the gut function is one of the core tenets of that. So anytime we think about autoimmunity, I think about how do we restore gut function? And there's, lots of wonderful foods that can help with that. Colostrum is great for that. Bone broth is great for that. And, there's all sorts of other healing foods for gut function.
I wanted to just ask you guys a question. Have you guys seen Hack Your Health Gut? It's like Hack Your Health and Help Your Gut or something. It's a new documentary, pardon me, on Netflix. And I just watched it yesterday. It just came out 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. And it is the best documentary on health I've ever seen. It's because the way you guys have seen Trolls, right? The show Trolls, like the movie. No? Okay. Well, for the listeners, Trolls, and it's kind of like this, they use like little cartoony felt sort of things. That's what they use like for the bacterias in the gut. And then like all of it's just crazy. So if you haven't watched it and you want to learn all about the gut and autoimmune conditions, they do such an incredible job. But I wanted to say too, to Alexandria, in regards to kind of healing that gut lining, and you were mentioning this, you were mentioning like bone broth, fruits and vegetables, high fiber, those sorts of things, a probiotic probably. What are some other things that destroy our gut, that are some of the biggest like assaults to our gut, and how can we take those steps to start healing? Again, you mentioned some things, but mind sharing a little bit more on that?
Of course. So one that people are probably not going to like me to say, but it's true, is that stress is really, really not conducive to our gut function. And the way that I talk about this as a nutritionist is, just because you're eating the best foods in the world does not mean you're digesting and assimilating those same foods. If we're eating in agitated states, we literally cannot extract the nutrition from the food. So if we're eating standing up, we're eating on the go, we're eating and we are judging ourselves for the food that we're eating, right? I've worked a lot with eating psychology. That's another thing that comes up, right? If we don't have a healthy relationship with the foods that we're putting in our body, right? There's all of this mind chatter that goes on in and around food as well. So all of these things affect digestion, assimilation, gut function, right? Our digestive enzymes don't function as optimally to help us break down the food, right? Hydrochloric acid to help, again, break down our food. These signals are not as effective if we're distracted while we're eating or we're running around. So I think stress and stress management is one important thing, particularly when it comes to food and gut function. We want to be, really, really conscious about. And then I think about the other is that, like, food composition is, something that I think is foundational, which is if we are eating real foods, i.e. foods from nature in the closest form to nature, those are the foods that our bodies are designed to break down and kind of know what to do with. Foods that are highly processed, i.e. mostly pre-digested, do not give our bodies a lot of the raw materials that we need, like in the form of prebiotics, for example, right? They do not feed our guts. And, they have lots of additives and colorings and things that, like, just quite frankly confuses the heck out of our bodies. So, eating balanced nutrition is something that I think is incredibly important for gut function as well. Those are the big ones that I think of, but I'm sure there are plenty more.
Let's talk about this term generational health, Alexandria. And so I want you to give our listeners an overview of what that means to you. And I also want to bring in male factor here in terms of, like, this isn't just a woman in terms of creating a baby. So we've got two people that need to care about preconception. So let's move into those areas.
Yes. So I would like people talking about generational health in the same way they talk about generational wealth, right? We understand generational wealth as a concept, but we haven't yet understood or talked about generational health. And so I'm trying to put that on the map so that people understand that it can be cultivated and shared in much the same way that generational wealth can be. And in fact, right, what more fundamental of a gift can we give children than that of vibrant health? Right. So the foundational principle around that is that your epigenome, meaning the environmental influence on your genetic blueprint, is modifiable and it is inheritable from generation to generation, just like your genome, which is the genetic blueprint itself. So you cannot change your genetic blueprint, but you can change your epigenome, the environmental impact on your genetics. And so what I want everyone to understand is that the healthier you are when you conceive, the better the foundation you set for your child's lifelong health. And so what you are doing in the 3, 6, 12-ish, 18 months, 24 months, right, before you conceive, you and your reproductive partner, which we will get into in a second, right, that is actually what sets the stage for your child's lifelong health. And it can affect diverse things like propensity for diabetes, propensity for alcoholism, propensity for mental health challenges, right? And we're just now starting to uncover the epigenetic mechanisms. We didn't have the scientific advancements, decades ago that we now do to understand how this is happening. And I think we're just scratching the surface. We're going to learn so much more about the things that are heritable and modifiable. But that's all to say that generational health is a gift that you have management over. I won't say control over, because you can't control everything, but you have agency over. And it's a profoundly impactful time period, because not only are you making changes to affect your health, but you're also affecting your future children's health and their children's health, right? Because it goes generation to generation. And then I will just touch on the male piece, which is that I think we're doing a disservice by not including male reproductive partners into this conversation, right? Biology does not care about our cultural construct that fertility is a female problem. Does not care, right? It is literally a 50-50 biological equation. And I get a little cheeky here because I think it's sometimes it's helpful, right, to simplify this into mathematical equations, which is literally that if there's a 50% contribution from the male reproductive partner and a 50% contribution from the female reproductive partner. So if we just think mathematically, if you only optimize 50% of an equation, you are not likely to get the result that you're looking for. So if we just think practically for a second, right, if we know that both reproductive partners' health matters, and if we know they matter in equal parts, then why are we still putting the burden on just the female partner and not giving our male reproductive partners the opportunity to understand A, what they can do, and B, be invited into the process? Like, if you're going to parent together, I really, really, really encourage people to be prepping together. It is more effective. And by the way, it's just also way more fun, right? If you're going to be making lifestyle changes, if you're going to be making dietary changes, it is so much easier to stick to it if you're doing it as a collective rather than you kind of off on your own, shouldering the entire burden yourself.
Amen to that. Amen to that, Alexandria. It's true. It's so true. And women this day and age, of course, we feel so much burden anyway. We have to handle everything, right? We have to handle the children. We have to handle the housework. It seems like that at times, right? But I think men, they do want to be our hero. They do want to come in. And I believe that if we do give some of that responsibility, or all of the responsibility, like his part of the responsibility, I should say, his part, but we can do it together, that makes, I think it kind of masculinizes, his kind of ego and helps him know that he is just as much part of this. So I think it's very important that you say that. Secondly, what are some tips? Would you say that those 5 kind of points that you mentioned at the beginning of our episode are the same 5 things that man needs to kind of manage when it comes to his reproductive health as well?
Yes. So, right, I think that the same principles of fertility as an extension of our overall health apply to males as they do for females. I think the timelines, fortunately or unfortunately, can be slightly shorter for men than they are for women, right? So for males, sperm development is just under 3 months, and new sperm is constantly being developed. So they may see a quicker turnaround in the changes that they're making than you may as a female, because technically the egg development cycle is about a year. And I don't think people talk about that, right? From kind of when the eggs wake up from their, like sleeping beauty-like state and, and then become ovulated. But really it's that last 3 to 4 month window where the eggs are most susceptible or most influenced by the environment that they're around. So that's either most susceptible in a positive way or a negative way. And so if you kind of line that up, it's like, 3 to 4-ish month cycles, and you may need several of them, right, depending on what your starting point is. So I would say that, for males, the same fertility blockers like nutrition and stress and environmental toxins are affecting males, and male sperm counts have dropped 60%, 60, in the last 40 years globally. It's a huge number. And there is a similar decline in testosterone levels. So much so that we're seeing the normal and average levels being adjusted down for this generation.
I would joked with you guys, all 3 of us were joking about my son, who I mentioned. He asked me what podcast we were doing today. And I was like, actually, we're going to be talking about preconception health. And he quickly grabbed the phone out of his pocket and threw it on the table. And he's like, yeah, no, I know, Mom, you got to get the phone away from your testicles. So is there those things like just, again, from a, what I'm sure, again, most of our listeners are women, very few men, but women want to be able to tell their partners, what they can be doing to help their health. And I like to even think of my sons, like, what can I tell them now? What can they be doing? So is the phone thing a big deal? Do you know, Alexandria? And, is that something we should really be careful about?
Yeah, I mean, there's conflicting data out there about this, but I think it is fairly, safe to say, based on what I've seen, that you probably want to keep the phones out of your pockets, the computers off your lap, right? And as much as possible. And so, if nothing else, right, it's a precaution. But the unfortunate reality with some of these things is you won't know until it's too late if we're making the wrong calculus here. So there is decent data to suggest that EMFs are interfering with sperm count and sperm quality. I've seen plenty of studies to that effect. So, I would, out of an abundance of caution, probably suggest to people as much as possible. And again, like to what you were saying, early, in the session, Jamie, like, let's be reasonable about it too. Like, we don't need to be driving ourselves crazy with this as much as possible, right? If you're at home, like, take the phone out of your pocket. If you're at home, put the computer on a desk or put it on, a mat, not directly on your lap, right? The other thing that I don't think is talked about as much is this concept of movement. And I think that's particularly true for male when we think about sperm function, is because we're working a lot more sedentary jobs in general. And so when we think about, right, like, basically what happens when we sit, we literally, about to knock my microphone off, we're literally kind of collapsing our reproductive area. And so when you collapse, right, that creates stagnation. And when you have stagnation, what don't you have? Right? You don't have blood flow. And blood flow is what brings oxygen and nutrients to the area. And when you're sitting for long periods of time, what I was saying about for males is it increases temperature. Testicular temperature in particular, right? One of the main things that we know is not great for sperm function, right? Increased testicular temperature. I mean, that's why the testicles are not sitting, right, immediately inside the body, right? It's to cool them off. And so when we're sitting for long periods of time, not only are we creating stagnation, but we're creating a lot of heat. So making sure that we're getting up and moving at regular intervals, right? Not even talking about exercise for the moment, although that is fantastic, right? Just getting up and moving, or being at a standing desk. That's I think a really important practice to add to your general regimen that I think is particularly important for men.
So important. Man, I wish this episode could go on and on, because I'm learning so much from you. You are brilliant. So in your book, can you kind of walk through, like, when someone looks at your book, reads your book, what will they walk away knowing? Will there be like a blueprint on, okay, I think you said this at the beginning, like, talk to your doctor about XYZ. Like, there's a plan in your book for women and men who are wanting to learn more.
Yes.
Awesome.
It is for women and men. And the idea is, so the first part of the book is kind of deconstructing myths, because I think that a foundational principle is that oftentimes we have to unlearn before we can learn. And in particular, in this category, there's so much nonsense and so many things that we have been told that is just not supported by the data. And so I think it's really important to, and so I demystify a lot of the things like, age is not the biggest predictor of fertility, and, kind of infertility is a symptom, rather than a diagnosis. I talk about kind of a lot of these things. If you have symptoms around your period, that, likely means that you may have to do some work in advance around your fertility, because you likely have an underlying hormonal imbalance, right? So all of these things are really important things at the kind of foundation. Then I introduced the concept of preconception. What is it? Why do we care about it? Kind of what does it consist of? And then the second part of the book is the kind of like, okay, now that we did that, what do we do about it? And so that's when I start to talk about, the testing side of it. So I go through epigenetic testing, which is kind of the testing that we do at Poplin, all of the different kind of proxies for your overall health. Then I go through genetic testing for couples that do want to explore that. That is not for every family, but I want people to know that it is an option, again, on the menu, so that you can decide, if it's right for you and your family. And then the preconception visit. And I talk through what a preconception visit should look like so that you can, be informed and maybe prepare some of that information in advance before going to your doctor. And then in the last part of the book, I talk through the main categories that I see. That can interfere with fertility, and that's environmental toxins and nutrition and, menstrual cycle dysregulation, lack of movement, so forth. And I talk about all the ways to modulate or mediate those items in, the best way possible.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like everybody needs to get this book, 9 Months is Not Enough by Alexandria DeVito. It sounds like all of us really should care about this more. And like you said, there has been guidelines for this. They just haven't really been put into practice. And because of the environmental changes and because of the way health has changed over the last 100 years, this is important more now than ever that all of us who care about fertility, who have our own children and care about their future fertility, these important concepts should be given to everybody. It is our right to know them, and this information should be spread to everybody. So Jamie and I appreciate so much the value that you are giving our listeners here today. So share this episode with your friends because this is so important for generational health. And Alexandria, please let us know where you're kind of at in terms of your websites and where can people get your book, and just give us all of your kind of handles.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for all of that. It's been so fun to chat about this topic. It is truly, near and dear to my heart. So if you're interested in anything book related, you can go to the book website. It is 9 Months is Not Enough, all spelled out with the number 9. If your interest is piqued in testing, that's at getpoplin.com, and then also on social Get Poplin. And for your listeners, you can use code GENIUS10 for 10% off our premium test if that's something that you all want to get started with. I'm always happy to jam about this. So, please feel free to reach out to me on either of those locations, and happy to support anyone on any part of their preconception journey. Just really excited to get the word out. And thank you for all that you do.
Alexandria, so just kind of concluding our episode today. And again, thank you for all your hard work. You're a trailblazer for sure. What do you wish every woman knew about her hormone genius?
That age is not the biggest predictor of fertility, and you have so much more agency over your reproductive health than you may have been led to believe.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Awesome. Well, thank you, Alexandria, so much. Again, we've learned so much. I can't wait to read your book because after our show, I'm going to go and buy it. I can't wait to read it. And just again, thank you. And Teresa, of course, so fun to do this episode with you today. Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.